Hello. Today we're going to talk about embedding quotations. So as we can see here on the worksheet, it says using quotations is important in the writing process because they add strong evidence when used appropriately. However, embedding quotations effectively into sentences is just as important as finding the correct quotations to use. Correctly embedded quotations move the reader from the quoted text back into the paragraph smoothly. Now, some of you may know how to properly embed a quotation, so this might be reinforcing skills that you already have. If you have struggled with putting quotations into text, this is definitely something that will help you. So one of the ways that we can transition into a quote is using something called a signal phrase. Signal phrases introduce the article a quotation is from, the person who said the quotation, or both. They are key for embedded quotations. The signal phrases used in the examples of this handout are written in bold print. Okay, so right here are the signal phrases, or at least some of them. And notice how they're strong verbs. They're not just says or tells. They're strong verbs like claims, points out, states. Another great transition that so many people use as a signal phrase is according to. You can see these here. Okay, strategies for embedded quotations. There are three strategies, three main ones you can use to embed quotations. You can set them off, build them in, or introduce quotations with a colon. You're probably going to usually use these first two here, but this third one is an option as well. So let's look at setting off a quotation. Set off quotations are set off from a sentence with a comma. Make sure you are aware of where the comma and where the quotation mark needs to go. You capitalize the first word of the quote. Now, as you can see here, you'll see the signal phrases in bold print. So here it says, as Jane Smith explains, comma, quotation mark, a duck's quack doesn't echo, period, quotation mark. Pay attention to the fact that outside of the quotation mark is the comma. The comma comes directly after the signal phrase or the strong verb. Explains, there's your signal phrase or signal word, there's the comma, then there's the quotation mark. And then notice here that the period is inside the quotation mark. Okay, if you were citing this, you would do this a little differently. You would get rid of that and then put the name here, and then you put the period, but you clearly don't need to do that because the author name is already in the sentence. So we would put the period inside the quotation mark. Sometimes you can set off the quotation and put the signal phrase at the end and put the quotation in the beginning. Cheese is the most stolen food in the world, comma, and then quotation mark here. Notice here when you start with a quote, the comma stays inside the quoted phrase. Then you have your quotation mark, then you have your signal phrase. In the article, Jane Smith writes, comma, quotation mark, snails can sleep for 3 years without eating, period, and then the quotation mark. Dolphins, now this one is where you kind of put the signal phrase in between the sentence. Dolphins, and you notice here there's a comma, then a quotation mark, as Jane Smith notes, and then another comma. And notice here we have another quotation. Since this is considered the same sentence, you didn't restart it, this first word after the quotation mark does not get capitalized. Okay, so dolphins, comma, notice the punctuation placement. Pause the video if you need to take a look. Okay, and then the continuation of the quote is here. Okay, so that's setting off a quotation. When do you use each one? I mean, it's up to you, but I highly recommend that if you have multiple quotes in an article or a essay or whatever you're writing, try to vary these, try to mix these up. Don't have every single quote use this format. Have some use this one, have some use this one. Okay, you should also vary as far as some quotations should be set off and some should be built in, as we can see here. Built-in quotations, unlike set off quotations, built-in quotations are built seamlessly into a sentence. They are not set off with commas and usually use the word that along with a signal phrase. Do not capitalize the first word of these quotes. Let's move this down here. Okay. Unlike set off quotations, I already read that. So here's the example. In the interest of animal sleeping habits, Jane Smith proposes that dolphins sleep with one eye open. Okay, notice here's the signal phrase, and then here's that right here. Now you would use this usually if You don't have a long quote to share. There's only part of a quote that is relevant to whatever argument you're making. That situation, you don't need to have a giant quote or a whole sentence, just the part of it that is relevant to what you're saying. Okay, so in that scenario, you would built in a quotation, as you can see here. And again, pause the video if you need to take a look at the punctuation. Jane Smith points out in her article about the sun that now notice here, this does not get capitalized. Okay, when you're building in a quotation, as it says right here, you do not need to capitalize the first word of these quotes. Okay, see that here with dolphins, you see that here with only. The only difference would be if you had a proper noun like Mike or I or something like that. Okay, the last strategy is introduce quotations with a colon. For this strategy, the signal is a complete sentence that goes before the colon. The sentence provides some information about the quotation to introduce it. The quotation follows the colon, and the first word in the quotation is capitalized. Okay, so we see here in her book about pets, Jane Smith discusses, again, we have a strong verb, aka a signal word, signal phrase, I guess you can call this whole part. The benefits of owning a dog, and then there's the colon, and then the quotation mark, and then a capital letter for the first word after the quotation. Okay, same example here. And again, pause the video so you can take a look at the punctuation placement. Okay, so common errors in embedding quotations. When embedding quotations, be sure to avoid the following common errors. Ambiguous pronouns. Make sure the name of the person who said the quote is not an introductory phrase, but part of the subject. The subject of the sentence should use the name of the person who said the quote. So their example here is in Jane Smith's book about pets, she claims that there's no need to have a pronoun following Jane Smith. Okay, you just have Jane Smith, she is your subject, she should be the one right next to her name, should be right next to the main verb or signal word. Okay, this example, in her book about pets, Jane Smith claims, notice how Jane Smith is moved here where it should be, right next to the main verb. So you have your main subject and main verb directly next to one another. Another no-no is floating quotations. Embedding quotations is important because the reader can follow the paragraph more easily. This means that there should be no sentences completely composed of a quotation, or the reader may find it difficult to connect the quotation to the point one wishes to make in the paragraph. Okay, notice here, they have an entire quotation. Okay, you want to embed these two together. Okay, sorry, my dog is barking in the background. Jane Smith states that there are many good reasons to eat dark chocolate, but then the quotation is totally by itself. You don't want that. You don't want a quotation without a signal phrase or a transition attached to it. So you can see here, and if you remember our different examples, okay, this is a built-in quotation. See, we have that, we have part of the quotation and it's lowercase, and we see that right here. Okay, now this is going to be some practice. So you're going to embed the following quotations, and the quotations here. This first one is an example that I'm going to do for you. Use any of the 3 techniques for embedding quotations mentioned above. Try using different signal phrases for each one. Okay, so this first quote is, the greatest glory in living lies not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. And this quote was said by Nelson Mandela. He was the first Black president of South Africa and a winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. Hopefully you have heard of him. Okay, so I want to embed this quotation into some sort of signal phrase. So let's see, I'm going to go up and I'm going to pick my signal phrase. How about according to and states? Okay, so I'm going to put, so let's start with my signal phrase. According to, actually, you know what? How about, forget according to. How about Nelson Mandela states that. Okay, so it looks like I'm going to use a built-in quotation. Okay, so I go back up here. I have that. Then I need the quote, but I shouldn't capitalize the first word. Actually, you know what? Since I want to use this whole quote, maybe I shouldn't use the built-in quotation, because the built-in quotation is really usually for part of a quote. See, this is the thinking process you have to go through when you do this kind of stuff. So I think maybe a set-off quotation is better. How about as Nelson Mandela argues. Maybe I can take this one. Argues is a strong signal phrase. And let's do as Nelson Mandela argues. Now, since this is a set off quotation on my comma, then my quotation mark, okay, and then I'll just copy and paste this. Oops. Put that there, okay, and then I need a quotation mark after it. Okay, so I can check my work by going up here, but I know that this is right. As Nelson Mandela argues, and then his quote, and then notice the punctuation placement. And as you can see, originally I was going to go with the built-in quotation, and then I thought more about it. Well, I want to use the entire quote. So, but this is the kind of thought process you need to think through when you're going through these things. Don't just haphazardly throw quotes together. Think about the process. Think about how they can read in the best way, how they can flow in the best way. Sometimes it's going to take some trial and error. And don't forget, using these strong verbs, aka signal phrases, make your writing better. You transition into your quote. Okay, so I want you to try doing what I did here, although try to use different formats, use different signal phrases, use a few setting off quotations, use a few built in, use the colon strategy. Maybe just try, there's 5 here, maybe try one for each. Just mess around and try to make sure you're maintaining proper punctuation, you're using the signal phrase, and then it follows the formula up here. Okay, and again, let me know if you have any questions. And we'll go over this in class.